What's the nicest thing a stranger has done for you? The band I played with in college had a gig at the 40 Watt in Athens, GA. This was a huge deal to us, and was certain to be one of the coolest shows we'd played. On the way, we were in our ancient conversion van towing a U-Haul, when some sun-blinded teenager pulled out directly in front of us on a 4-lane highway in Snellville. No one was hurt, but the van's front end was damaged enough to make it undrivable. Wheel well crushed into a wheel. A tow truck happened by, heard our story, and ended up towing our fully loaded van and trailer directly to Athens to the show, over an hour out of their way. We thanked them profusely, and decided to delay thinking about how we're going to handle things until after the show. We played the show, yes, it was awesome, and came back outside. The tow guys had towed our van and trailer back to their shop in Snellville, made it drivable again, and towed it back to Athens. They were all standing around in the parking lot with crap-eating grins, and refused any payment. It was beautiful. I was really hoping this was going to end thusly, because we made it on time. The biggest music producer of the decade heard us and we've been going strong ever since. Love, Michael Stipe. I got mugged in a foreign country about 4 years ago, and had no money or it. Randomly this older American expat came up to me and said she overheard me talking to the cops and was going to help me out. She got me in touch with the embassy, and let me stay at her little house while I got hooked up with a new passport. I actually ended up staying there for 2 weeks helping her around the house. Her husband had died a few years back, by fixing up random things. Oiling hinges, rehanging doors, fixed a leak in her sink, that kinda stuff, etc etc. We would also hang out at night and just chat, and sometimes I would play her husband's old guitar. I sucked so bad, but she enjoyed it just the same. We kept in touch for the most part via email, but about 2 years ago she stopped writing back. Anyways, I got a phone call about 6 months after she stopped writing. Turns out she had been dying from cancer the entire time I was there, and in her will left me her husband's guitar. Oh, for frick's sake, now I am crying. 42 years ago, an anonymous person left a large box of groceries on our front porch. Sometime after we all went to bed. My mother was supporting 5 children on a 50-hour week at minimum wage with no help from my father, the state, or anybody else. There were many nights where we had only potato soup and cornbread. Some nights we went to bed hungry. We never found out who left the groceries, but it did more than fill our stomachs. It also filled our hearts, knowing that somebody else would go out of their way to do it. Not knowing who our benefactor was, we never could pay it back, so we endeavor to pay it forward. Yes, pay it forward, always. Share brotherly sisterly when you see someone in need, and the world is a better place for it. Applauded for seeing things clearly. When I was about 6 or 7, my family only had one car and my dad used it to go to work. Because of that, I would walk with my mom and my 2 sisters a good couple of miles to the store. Well, one day it began to pour down on us pretty hard. We crossed an intersection, and as we did so a car pulled up to our side, handed us a large umbrella and went on its way. I don't think I'll ever forget that. When I was stationed in Okinawa, a friend and I decided to drive up to the north end of the island. Not a lot of people live up there, so it was a kick in our collective nards when the front right tire of his Supra exploded, which was already bald from too much drifting. Stupid sport anyways. A nice 80-something Okinawan man picked us up, took us to his house, pulled the old tire off the wheel, put on a new tire, drove us back to the car, and helped us put it back on. He didn't speak any English. We didn't speak a word of Japanese. We tried to give him about 5,000 yen, but he refused and spoke the only English word we heard from him the entire time. Friend. He shook our hands and drove off. Coolest dude I've ever met. This is probably the coolest story on here. Thank you for posting it. I have lost my wallet skiing 4 times and 4 times it has been returned with nothing missing. Thanks world. 2 things. A few New Year's Eves ago, I was in a broadside rollover crash. I was driving, with 3 of my friends in the car with me. We were crossing an intersection and were hit by another driver who ran a red light. We flipped several times and slammed into a traffic light post across the street. When the car finally landed right side up, all of us were dazed and winded. Within seconds, a group of bald, Tatted up cholas and whiffer beaters were at my car, turning off the ignition, prying open the doors to help us out and calling 911. Once we were all able to climb out of the mangled wreck, we were taken by ambulance in pairs to separate hospitals. I was left alone briefly, generally unhurt, but shivering, upset and crying, on a gurney in the hospital hallway. An older black woman in a gold lame jacket, who was there because her niece had also just been in a crash and been injured more seriously, came out into the hallway and hugged me tight. I've read every single comment in this thread. This is the only one where I started to cry a little bit. I can't imagine how it must have felt to just have a little bit of comfort at such a trying time. When I was 16, I got my first job as a door-to-door salesman. Yeah, I know. One shift had been especially bad with people not buying anything. It was a commission-only job, but most of them were meaner than usual. It was also incredibly hot, and after a few hours of walking, I felt like I was going to collapse from heat stroke at any moment. Anyway, I stagger up to yet another doorstep, ring the doorbell and going to my sales pitch to an older woman who's glaring at me before suddenly interrupting by yelling, "I've had a bad day. I have a headache and you're loud." I don't know what came over me. The woman was well within her rights to tell me off, but instead I just went off on her. Then realizing what I was doing, I suddenly shut my mouth, backed off and started apologizing, to which she said, "Would you like a glass of water?" I meekly replied, "Yes please." So she went off to her kitchen, got me a glass of water filled with ice and also handed me a can of Coke for later. She added that she wasn't going to buy anything from someone on her doorstep, but took one of my flyers and said she'd look it over and make sure I did get the commission if there was anything she wanted. Still can't believe she was that nice instead of calling the cops. I am that lady. It wasn't water. It was the 80s. I was only 22 years old. My dad worked for Pan Am, so I got to fly for free. I was flying Miami, London, Zurich, where I would start a new job, but at the time I was broke. I got to London and it was late at night and there was only one more flight to Zurich until the next day. Because of a previous flight that cancelled, the flight to Zurich was full. They were calling names at the gate for the few standby passengers to board. The last name was called and I was the only one left. The guy ahead of me got the last seat on the plane. I stood there not knowing what I was going to do. I was all alone in a strange country. Tears started pouring down my face. The gate employee went on the plane and when she came back she told me to follow her on board. She then took me to the cockpit where she flipped down a tiny jump seat behind the pilot and told me to sit there. I was flabbergasted. The two pilots and engineer introduced themselves and were so nice. So I got to sit in the cockpit of a Pan Am 747 for the best plane ride ever. During this past winter I was driving from my college in the middle of the night and crashed into a huge pile of snow that was between two lanes. My car wasn't damaged or anything but was stuck on the snow and I felt really helpless. Many cars drove by, including a police car. WTF. Until a guy stopped. He was dressed like he was a freaking pimp with the nicest watch I ever seen and was just the coolest looking black guy ever. He helped me push my car off the snow and everything was fine. Pimping may not be easy, but it does make other things, like pushing cars, seem easier to accomplish by comparison. Well, some stranger's family, all I know is that he was a 17 years old, decided to donate his organs when he died and I was the lucky recipient of one of his kidneys. That kidney got me off of dialysis and I was able to re-enter the workforce, going on 5 years now. When I was 22 years old, I went to pick my sister up from the bus station one evening as she was coming home from university for the weekend. I didn't have a cell phone at the time, and my sister was about 15 minutes late. I was approached by two teenage homeless people, a guy and a girl. The following conversation ensues. Girl: "Excuse me sir, do you have a quarter that I could borrow?" Me: "Sorry, I don't. In fact, I could use a quarter to call my sister from the phone booth." Girl: "Oh, okay." They walk away. You guessed it. About 10 minutes later the girl comes back and gestures towards me. I look down and she hands me a quarter and says sweetly, "I hope your sister is okay." My parents divorced when I was 13. My mum would drop me off in Liverpool so I could play badminton with my dad on Friday night, then stay with him over the weekend at my nan's. then go home on Sunday ready for school on Monday. So she drops me off at the sports center, and I wait, then wait some more, and then a little more. So as this was before mobile phones, I just decide to walk to my nan's house. As I know now, through one of the rougher parts of Liverpool. After a mile or so, I stop and ask a woman if I'm heading in the right direction. She looks at me as if I'm from another planet. "You're walking to Old Swan from here, take this and get the bus." Well, me being nice and everything told her that I was okay, and that I just needed to know I was heading in the right direction. But she insisted, and gave me 50p and said that if I ever saw someone that needed help, that she was paying me to help them. Told me which stop to wait at, and what bus to get. As I was walking over to the bus stop, a lad asked me if I had a light. I didn't. Then he tells me to give him my leather jacket. I was more than a bit green at the time, and just stood there not knowing what to do, until he asks me how old I was. 14. To which I replied 18. He tells me that he got the wrong person and wanders off. A very strange day indeed. To this day, I always stop if I see someone that needs help. Pick up hitchhikers, have given a couple of quid if they needed it. Helped more than a few people change a tire at the side of the road. I'll generally be the first to offer help in work, if a colleague needs some help with something, work related or personal. I didn't know until quite recently that it was called paying it forward, but when I found out, it made me chuckle that it had a name. 50p might not seem like much, but it really had an effect on me. My house was flooded in the Nashville incidents on the 1st of May. We had just moved into the neighborhood in October, so most of my neighbors were still strangers. One neighbor spent all afternoon helping me move belongings upstairs and elevate the furniture we couldn't move. Another neighbor helped me move a bunch of stuff to his garage and store it there. The next day, an army of volunteers descended on the neighborhood. My damage wasn't too major, so they helped with a few things and moved on, leaving a pizza and some water. 6 different families from our school offered to let my entire family of 5 stay with them so my son could finish first grade. Over the next week, various strangers brought food every day. Teenagers roamed the neighborhood looking for people who needed help, and a local church brought everyone flowers. It was really quite amazing. No one complained or lamented about the situation. They all just banded together, found the people who needed help, and got it done. My father redefines the word fricted, among other less savory terms of endearment. Anyway, one of his recent episodes of sheer awesomeness was to testify in court that he had already paid in full for the rest of my baby sister's senior year of high school. Per usual, that was an utter lie, and he had paid none of the tuition at all. This was just the latest in the 2-year-long, no-holds-barred divorce my parents have been going through. Now, my baby sister is the only one of us still living with our parents, so the divorce was hitting her the hardest. We weren't even sure if her grades were gonna be good enough to graduate, to which dad responded with just drop out. Who needs school anyway? Because she was dealing with the front lines of this knockdown drag-out parental war, which literally left her unable to get to school some days. So fast forward to 3 weeks ago, my sister and mother are at the school senior dinner, where the administration is acknowledging all kinds of excellence in its student body with awards and whatnot. Mom and sis didn't want to go. They were under no illusions about her class standing. But several teachers pressed the issue. In the middle of a string of various awards and speeches and laughter and tears, a white man in his late 50s walks up to the front of the room and gets the MC's attention. The MC looks confused for a minute, asks the man a question quietly, then nods and announces, "And the winner of that guy's name, scholarship is, my sister. Please come up to collect your award." My mother and sister were stunned. The man was an otherwise unknown state senator, and he had created a scholarship just for my sister. My only guess is that somebody somewhere told him about our family situation, but I honestly have no idea what really happened. TLDR. A stranger gave my baby sister a scholarship that covers full in-state tuition, room, board, and books for 4 years in the midst of the complete disintegration of my family. When my mother told me this story later that evening, I cried because I couldn't believe that this total stranger had just bestowed such kinds on my family. I'm actually getting a lump in my throat writing this. My sister, in fact my whole family, deserves the break, no doubt. But since when does that mean anything? Thanks, Mystery Man. I was waiting in line overnight at a Long Island Best Buy for a Wii. A guy came up, asked what I was waiting for. I told him and he asked if I wanted coffee. I replied back thinking it was a joke with milk. 1 hour later he came back with 3 coffees and a dozen donuts. Sometimes the kindness of strangers astounds me. When I was just a little kid, about 3 or 4 years old, I went to the grocery store with my mom. We saw one of those huge claw machines, and inside it was a golden teddy bear, which I of course wanted immensely. My mom saw this and said I could try for it. First time I came really close to getting it, so she let me try again and again, and so on until she was out of quarters. Not 10 seconds after we finally gave up, a little girl, maybe 10 years old, came up and got the bear on the first try. She ran over to us and gave me the bear, without asking anything in return. I kept that bear all the way until my junior year of high school, when I gave it to my young niece. But man, even as a 20-year-old guy, that teddy bear can still bring me to tears just by holding it. I came back from a trip and went directly to the kennel to pick up my dogs. I was so tired from traveling that I left my wallet on top of my car and drove off. When I got home I realized what I'd done and drove 35 miles back to the kennel to see if I could find my wallet. Of course, I had no success. Still searching frantically, I answered a call from my insurance company, thinking they were telling me I was late on my bill or something, but they were calling to say that a man had found my wallet in a major intersection, found my insurance card, and contacted the office so they could get in touch with me. This guy had stopped traffic in a very busy intersection, picked up all my papers that had flown everywhere, and returned my wallet to me. I was once running for my morning bus to get work. The road is curved so it's hard for the bus driver to see me. The bus started taking off as I was nearing it. Not 10 seconds later does a car show up and pulls a U-turn. A lady flings open her passenger side door and tells me to get in. It was pretty funny because this was in Sweden, and I was new to the country. I'm Canadian, so my Swedish wasn't very good. I understood her when she told me that she saw what happened, but I had to reply in English. Poor lady just wanted to do a favor and ended up having to bust out her underused English early on a Monday morning. On the plus side, I had been warned that Swedes are cold and rude to strangers. There are always exceptions. We caught up to the bus and I made it to work on time and unscathed. I think you failed to mention you're to die for good looks. Some random woman brought me a home-cooked Thanksgiving dinner to the Starbucks I hung out in while homeless. I hadn't eaten at all on Thanksgiving, and I met her after Starbucks closed. We talked for about an hour, and then she came back the next day with the food. My eyes leaked a bit. That's exactly the kind of thing Thanksgiving is meant for. Now it's just another excuse for people to cook way more food than they could possibly eat, and stuff their faces. Good for her. It's not a super crazy story, but when I was living in the dorms, I had some clothes in the dryer, and at this particular college, dryer space was coveted, so leaving your clothes in the dryer was kind of a dong move. But it was expected that if your load was done, people could leave it on the table for you to get when you get back. If you're not there, I'm totally cool with that. I've also seen some seriously dong moves on part of other people, but that's dorm life I guess. Anyhow, I had clothes in the dryer, and I can't remember why, but I got carried away doing something for like an hour or so longer than I expected. I finally returned to the laundry room to find some nice stranger had folded all my clothes for me. That is a task I would never go for myself. But whoever did it, I thought it was super awesome. I've done this. I needed some good karma. Only for guys' clothes though. I wouldn't want a chick to think I was creeping on her panties. I rear-ended someone about 2 years ago late at night driving back from school. I was driving a squeaky old Camry and the car I hit was a big truck. Needless to say, my car took the brunt of the damage, but I was mainly freaked that I hit another car. The lady I hit got out of her car to examine her damage and I went over to apologize. Then I saw she had 2 kids in the car and I freaked out even more. I just kept saying over and over, "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, oh my god, you have kids in the car, I'm so sorry." She told me, "It's okay, we're all fine, it's just property damage," and her kids, probably 4 and 7, were shouting. That was fun. It was like a roller coaster. I'm pretty sure I was very close to just bursting into tears, but the lady hugged me and was totally nice to me. She didn't have to be. A lot of people are buttholes when they get rear-ended, but she showed me so much kindness that I don't think I've experienced from a stranger since. Oh, I forgot to add one thing. A week or so after the accident, I drove by the lady's house to drop off the money to cover her truck's damage. While I was there, she made breakfast for me, and it was dang good. This past week, I was walking through Lower Manhattan. I was stopped at a crosswalk in a group of people waiting for the light to change, and a man came up next to me and started saying inappropriate things to me. Use your imagination. I was stuck, seeing as cars were whizzing past, and the man started getting sort of aggressive, stepping in front of me when I tried to move away. I was starting to get really uncomfortable, but for some reason I didn't tell him to go frick himself. Out of nowhere, this girl around my age links her arm through mine and goes, "Hey, I haven't seen you in so long. It's great to see you," and pulled me away from the man and started walking with me down the street, keeping up the charade until she was sure he was gone. It wasn't life-saving, but it was a sweet gesture from a stranger. I couldn't tell you how many homeowners made me lunch or cooked me dinner when I painted houses, other than asking them if they had any items around the yard that need special consideration, fickle plants, etc. Getting them to sign off on the color before spraying, and having them sign my completion form when the job was done. They were all complete strangers. The salespeople did most of the talking. A hot lunch can go a long way if you have someone who will be working around your home for a day or more. Equals. Gave me life. Adoption. Same story. My mum was 15. She put me up for adoption, and then came and got me back from the foster parents after 2 weeks. I can't imagine the strength it would have taken her to decide to take me back. We talk so often of the wrongs. It is good to open the eyes to the positive. When I was 15 in 1995, I had a PowerBook Duo, a nice laptop back then. I took it very seriously and there was no way I'd get another. Then I forgot it on the train when going to school. I was crushed. The person who found it called my place and even brought it to my mother's job. Thank you very much, stranger. Another, my lung had been hurting for a few days, and I ended going to the doctor. It was a collapsed lung. I had to go to the hospital. I said I would go by foot. No one could drive me. It was about 3 km, but he insisted upon driving me there in his own car, which he did. Very kind of him. Merci beaucoup, Dr. Blassel. He drove you there because you could have died on the way. When I was first driving on my own, maybe a week or two after I got my license, I stopped at a gas station in the middle of nowhere and filled up on gas, only to suddenly realize I had much less cash than I thought I had, and was maybe $4 short of being able to pay for what I has just put in my car. I gambled most of my change trying to call my parents or a friend to come by and lend me the cash so I could leave, but no one answered their phone. In retrospect, there are plenty of easy ways to resolve the situation, but at the time, to a young kid just getting used to being on his own, the situation seemed overwhelming and terrifying. In desperation, I told an elderly couple who had just pulled up the situation and begged them to lend me a few dollars. The husband told me he was sorry, but had seen that scam too many times before. Not knowing what to do, I went back to the payphone and started trying all the numbers I had already tried again. At the verge of panic tears, I was surprised by the voice of the elderly husband behind me. He said, "My wife told me not to be so cold-hearted," and handed me a $5. I was so overwhelmed with relief I could barely speak. I didn't even think to get his name or address so I could pay him back. I am not even sure I thanked him. To this day, I never refuse any request for help that I can safely provide. That one act of needless, unexpected empathy led to me helping dozens, maybe hundreds of other people throughout my life in ways which often amazed them. Helped me when I passed out on the tube. When I came to, a whole carriage full of people were staring at me, and only one lady had moved to help me. She got me off the train at the next stop and sat with me for an hour giving me water and Haribo until I felt good enough to make my way home. The people that helped you sound incredible. Such kindness. I passed out on a crowded Nick subway once. When I came to, I was seated in someone's seat. One person was making sure I was okay and most people were minding their own business. I appreciated the respectful disinterest, especially considering that more than one person must have helped get me in a seat. When I was little, I was queuing up to get the Queen of Hearts signature. Some bastard pushed me over to get ahead of me. I cut my leg and sat crying like a baby. A woman came up to me and gave me a Disney princess plaster. After experiencing so much rudeness that holiday, it was so refreshing to have someone be nice. Frick you guy who pushed me over, I still have a frickin' scar. I was at a restaurant in Boston and a guy at the table next to me gave my girlfriend and me the rest of his very expensive bottle of wine when he was leaving, and said how nice we looked. The girl is my wife now, so we must really have gone well together. My Hex Angels story. The year was 1975. My father and stepmother were driving from Oregon to Texas, via Nevada. My sister was nearly 6, and I was 4. So we're cruising through the desert at a gazillion miles an hour, and we come upon a flock of Hex Angels going the same direction. Father passes them, with my sister and I waving and smiling from the back seat. These badass bikers are all smiling back, waving, and giving us thumbs up signs. Father and stepmother were frowning, acting worried, and getting all paranoid. Sure enough, car runs out of gas and overheats all at the same time. Father pulls the car over and puts the hood up. He's seriously sweating it, you know. Here come the Hex Angels. They recognize us right off, of course, and pull over. They're all hugging us kids, smiling, asking if we need help. Father stays with us girls, and stepmother gets on the back of one Holly, and a group of bikes goes roaring off to the nearest town. They come back about 2 hours later with gas and water for the car, food and water for us, more hugs and well wishes. They made sure the car would start, then zoomed off into the distance. Nobody has ever been able to convince me that bikers are bad news, because even the Hex Angels will look out for little kids. I wonder if any of those guys are still around. My favorite stories are the ones where badass, bad looking, etc. people turn out to be kind. I used to work at a pet store. One day this Jamaican guy came in asking about how to set up his first saltwater fish tank. I spent about 3 hours walking him through every step of the process, everything he needed to do before he even contemplated buying fish. He was a nice guy and ended up buying about $1,000 worth of equipment. He came back the next day and gave me a sack of weed. Years ago I was on vacation in Ireland with my sister. We spent the day in Dublin and then attempted to take the bus back to our bed and breakfast. It was dark outside and we weren't familiar with the area, so we missed our stop. We spoke to the driver and told him we were lost. We were the only 2 passengers on the bus. It was really late at night, and it was the end of his shift. He drove the bus back to the bus terminal, grabbed his lunchbox, and drove us to our bed and breakfast in his car. He wouldn't accept any money. He was, like all the other Irish folks we met that week, super nice to us. To this day I love the Irish. I received a call early morning in Florida about my mother, living in Virginia, being rushed to the hospital with little to go on other than she had suffered a head injury. I'm Korean American but can't speak Korean. The gentleman dating my mother knew very little English, so I wasn't able to get much information, so you can imagine the panic. My girlfriend, now wife, and I rushed to the airport to make an emergency flight, only to discover all of the flights were fully booked with no possible connections of any sort. It being near the Christmas holidays, I was speaking to my father on my cell phone to discuss what options we could do when one of the ticket agents called me over and quietly informed me a space was just made for us on a flight about to leave. I was able to purchase 2 tickets, and he gave me very empathetic condolences and hopes for my mother to be okay, and to this day I'm eternally grateful. In the end I had to make the decision to let my mother pass in peace. The head injury was too severe and brain activity was no longer present. It's when you're feeling your worst that you can really appreciate the nice things people can do. Do you still keep in touch with these people? I hope you do. And for mine, the nicest thing a stranger has done for me is get me work experience. Although it doesn't sound like much, it has given me a boost in life I could not have got any other way. At the time I was working in John Lewis and I was serving a very nice customer, and we were talking about what was in store for my future. So I explained going to uni, studying such and such. Turns out he was on the board of directors at Honda and he got me experience at the UK's head office. To him it meant nothing, but it has opened up so many horizons for me career-wise after university, not to mention a guaranteed job at the Honda offices if I wanted it. I wish I did. I never thought to get contact info from them. I think I was just so astounded that they rented the car just to get me there quickly. They were going to stay the night in Minneapolis with some friends and take the flight tomorrow, that I just didn't know how to react. A man helped my then pregnant wife, almost 4 months, out of her car, right after she totaled it by driving through a telephone pole. She passed out because of low blood pressure. I will never forget the man's face as I shook his hand a million times, very much out of breath for having to run 3/4 of a mile to where it happened. Traffic was backed up, both wife, and now 1/2-year-old daughter, were okay. Scariest moment of my entire life. The kindest thing a stranger ever did for me was introduce me to a certain 12-step program for drug addiction. I was strung out on crystal meth for close to a decade, but I would use anything in a pinch. I was a freaking garbage can junkie. Anyways, I learned that I never had to use dope again, even if I wanted to. I have been given a chance to actually participate in my life, rather than chase my next high and watch my life pass by me. Today, I have been clean for 2,697 days, and I have been given the chance to pass what I have learned on to other men and women, which is a gift to me. In my late high school years I worked in a 24/7/365 convenience store. Come Christmas, shifts were pretty much decided by draw, and I managed to get a 9 AM to 5 PM shift. My family worked around it pretty well. Anyways, it was a really quiet morning since everyone was at home doing the Christmas thing, when a guy comes in and heads to the candy aisle. He stands there a few seconds and yells up to the till, "Hey, what's a good chocolate bar?" I reply that I like Reese cups, and my co-worker said she likes Twix. So the guy grabs one of each and brings them up to the till. I ring him up and ask him if he needs a bag. "Nope," he says. "Merry Christmas," and he walked out leaving the 2 chocolate bars on the counter for my co-worker and me. It was a really nice gesture, and almost made up for all the other customers that day who were convinced it was my fault that lottery tickets couldn't be printed checked and that we ran out of batteries, ice, milk, eggnog, bacon, bread, etc. At my local DMV there is a ticket number waiting system to get seen. I take a ticket and look up to the current number. There are about 50 numbers ahead of me and the place is packed with trolls. I hunker down for a several-hour wait. Suddenly a random stranger walks by on his way out and hands me a ticket for the next number about to be called. Said he always sneaks 2 tickets when he first gets in so he can make someone's day and give the ticket he doesn't use to someone on his way out. Skipping the DMV line is awesome. You know, sitting there trying to pick out who to give it to might actually help kill some time. That is a really good idea. Several years ago my son and I moved from a small college where I had attended to a large college town. I thought I had a place for us to stay, but it fell through at the last minute. Money was tight, but we found a small motel to stay at until I could figure something out. Our money ran out and I didn't know what to do. We had a beat up old van with no seats in the back that we ended up sleeping in for 2 weeks. It was hot and we were miserable. We ran out of money and I didn't know what to do. We went to the library because it was air conditioned. A lady who worked there asked me what was wrong. I told her my situation. I asked her about help in the area. She hauls out her purse and gave me $120. I told her that no, that was okay. I would work something out. She insisted that I take the money. It was the bridge that kept us going until I got more money. I drank way too much alcohol. 33 shots over the course of an hour I believe, one night back in college and became unconscious and unresponsive. My roommate was hanging out with some girls in the room and while my roommate insisted he's fine the girls panicked, picked me up, dragged me out to the car and drove me to the emergency room. My heart stopped a few minutes later and they were able to revive me. Had it not been for them I would have died that night. Jesus Christ. A shot is 44 milliliters, so 3344 equals 1.452 liters of alcohol. Assuming you drank something like an 80 proof liquor, that's 0.41.452 equals 0.58 liters of alcohol in your system. If you're 170 pound male, That's a back almost 0.75. 0.4 is enough to kill you. Thank the girls. When I was 16 I hit a deer and then hit a tree in the middle of a PA winter. I woke up in an Amish house on the floor of the kitchen and they had stitched up the large cut above my eye. They said, "We found you and you were so cold." The roads had closed that Monday night and it was Tuesday morning. No phone, no power. My parents were worried sick. I never forgot them, and until I moved away I would stop by and drive them into town, and in the winter I would plow their road which was dirt. I will never be able to repay them for what happened that night. I will never be able to repay them for what happened that night. Sounds like you did a pretty good job. When I was an 18-year-old girl in college, I had grown up in small towns my whole life. One summer I stayed at school and got a job selling encyclopedias door to door. Shortly after my first few days, they took my purse, with my driver's license and all my money, and forced me to stay in a hotel room with 10 other people. We got kicked out of the hotel, and they sent me out to a strange neighborhood in Peoria, Illinois, with no idea of when they would pick me up or where I would stay. I walked door to door until dusk when I met the young guy and his pregnant wife. They both became immediately alarmed. Why is a young woman out after dark at a strange neighborhood? I told them what had happened, and the husband called my boss and told him that he'd better meet him at 8 p.m. promptly and bring my purse, it and belongings, or he would call the police. I was terrified. When they met, the husband was so awesome and threatened my boss. He got my stuff and took me home. They had taken my money and wallet, so I had nothing. I stayed that night. The next day, they called my parents, told them where I was, what was happening, and put me on a bus for home, with $50 for the trip. I never saw them again, but if not for them, I'd probably be dead in a ditch somewhere. First trip to New York City. I drove up and soon found myself driving in Times Square. Big mistake. My car dies in the middle of an intersection. A truck driver saw the problem, jumped out of his truck and helped me push the car to a parking lot. I don't know if that's the nicest thing, but it's the one that comes to mind. You were just in his way. He was probably secretly cursing you. As I evacuated for Hurricane Katrina, I had a cat carrier with kittens in it. When we finally realized a hotel was not an option, they were all booked at this point, we finally pulled into a Red Cross shelter. Side note, I didn't live with my mom at the time, but we evacuated together, as in we met up and drove off together. My car didn't have AC, so I convinced my mom to take the kittens, because they were panting really bad in our car. Anyway, my mom got to the shelter before us, and signed in as me and my GF went to find some food. At this point it was probably around 9 p.m. and I hadn't eaten since I woke up at about 8 a.m. When my GF and I went to the shelter, my mom told me she met some nice local woman that was taking care of everyone's pets. She apparently had a barn and stables and such, and happily agreed to take out kittens. The next day I met her, and we explained how 2 of the kittens were currently being bottle fed by us, and she happily agreed to bottle feed them once we handed over the formula bottle. She took care of them the entire time we were in the shelter, and refused any money I tried to give her for food, litter, etc. TLDR. A woman I didn't know took care of my kittens after a hurricane that put me into a Red Cross shelter that didn't allow pets. When my car broke down 60 miles from my home, I called AAA to have it towed. Since I only had a basic service, I could only get it towed up to 7 miles for free, so I had it towed to the nearest Saturn dealership. It was nearly 7 p.m. by the time I reached the dealership and I needed to get back home that night. I tried calling rental car services, but they all closed at 6 p.m. My only option for car rental was the nearest airport 30 miles away. My phone battery had died while trying to call rental places, so I asked the dealership services manager if I could borrow their phone to call a taxi to take me to the airport. The service manager asked if I could wait 30 minutes until they closed and he'd drive me to the airport. I gladly accepted and found out the manager was driving up to visit his terminally ill twin brother in a hospital near the airport. I was so happy I bought him some brownies the next day. Like this video and this good boy will play you a nice song. Like and subscribe, you magnificent person.